Ailing millionaire Nicholas requested his nurse to pretend to be his daughter for a single day. Hours later, he was stunned when his wife barged into the room with a lawyer and a will. Emily sat at her modest kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and newspapers filled with job listings. She let out a long sigh, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on her. At 28 years old, Emily was a nurse whose strong-willed determination belied her frail appearance. Her chestnut hair and hazel eyes reflected her observant and nurturing nature. Raised in an orphanage, Emily had no family to rely on. Her entire life was a testament to her resilience. "I need to find a job soon," she whispered, her voice laced with urgency as she sifted through the ads. It had been days since she started feeling weak and dizzy, her health worsening as her financial struggles deepened. Without money for treatment, finding a job was her only option. As though her prayers had been answered, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number, but Emily picked up immediately, her heart racing with hope that it could be a reply to one of the many resumes she had sent. "Good afternoon," a commanding female voice said. "This is Meredith. I'm looking for a nurse to care for my husband. Your name was highly recommended." Emily's heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since she'd seen any nursing opportunities. "I don't recall applying for this position, but I'd love the opportunity to work as a caregiver," she replied, trying to keep the desperation out of her tone. Meredith's voice softened slightly. "My husband, Mr. Nicholas, heard about your expertise. We need someone with your skills immediately. Could you come to the Vanderbilt estate for an interview today?" Emily couldn't believe her luck. "Yes, of course. I'll be there." When Emily arrived at the Grand Vanderbilt estate, she was greeted by Meredith, a tall, stern woman whose presence was as sharp as her tailored suit. During the interview, Emily quickly sensed that Meredith's concern for her husband's health was minimal at best. "My husband Nicholas has been diagnosed with a rare condition," Meredith said, her voice cold and detached. "The doctors claim he has only months to live, but I believe they're being overly dramatic. It's nothing serious." Emily's heart ached for Nicholas. She couldn't ignore the callousness in Meredith's words, as though her husband's life was an inconvenience. "I'm sorry to hear that," Emily replied, her voice soft with sympathy. "May I meet Mr. Nicholas?" Meredith's lips tightened, but she nodded. Before they could proceed, a man wearing gardening attire accidentally stepped into the room. Meredith immediately turned on him, her face contorting with disdain. "Are you blind? Get out," she snapped. The gardener, clearly embarrassed, apologized profusely before retreating. Emily, taken aback by the harshness of Meredith's reprimand, gave the man a brief look of understanding and pity before refocusing on the purpose of her visit. When Emily was finally led to Nicholas's room, she was startled to find him struggling to breathe, his face pale and his chest heaving. She instinctively rushed to his side, adjusting his position to help him breathe more easily and gently patting his back. "He's not breathing," she gasped. Without hesitation, Emily began chest compressions, her training taking over as she fought to save his life. Moments later, Nicholas took a desperate gulp of air, his weak frame trembling as he struggled to stabilize. "Are you all right now?" Emily asked gently, her eyes filled with concern. Nicholas, still catching his breath, managed a faint smile. "You have angel hands." "Thank you," he whispered, his emerald eyes meeting hers with gratitude. Despite his frail condition, he radiated a quiet strength that struck Emily deeply. As she glanced at him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Nicholas was far too thin and looked as though he hadn't been receiving proper care. She thought, but quickly pushed the judgment aside. "I'm glad you're feeling better, Mr. Nicholas," she said, offering him a reassuring smile. From the doorway, Meredith's expression hardened as she observed the exchange. "Well, it seems you managed to do something right," she remarked, her voice laced with irritation rather than appreciation. "But I think I can take care of my husband on my own. This was just an accident." Nicholas, his weak voice suddenly resolute, cut her off. "No, Meredith, I want her to be my nurse. I still have a say in this house," he said firmly, turning his gaze toward Emily. "Emily, you saved my life. Please stay and help me." Emily hesitated, feeling the gravity of the situation. "I'll do my best to help, Mr. Nicholas," she replied sincerely. Then, glancing at Meredith, she added, If I may, I'd like to stay here full-time to monitor his condition closely. Even a small space to sleep like this armchair would suffice. Nicholas shook his head. You'll stay in our best guest room, he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. Turning to his wife, he added, Meredith, see that she's accommodated. It's the least we can do after what she's done for me. Reluctantly, Meredith nodded, though her irritation was palpable. Weeks passed, and Emily fell into a steady routine caring for Nicholas. However, her own health was deteriorating. She felt increasingly weak, and dizziness often overcame her. I need to see a doctor, she thought. Maybe I can pick up some side work on my days off to afford a visit. But the thought of leaving Nicholas, even briefly, filled her with unease. I'll wait until he's better. He needs me now. As she climbed the grand staircase of the Vanderbilt estate, carrying a tray of medications and medical documents, Emily tried to shake off her fatigue. Entering Nicholas's room, she found him finishing a phone call. His voice, as frail as a whisper, carried a sense of urgency. The moment he hung up, his worried gaze locked onto hers. Emily, he said, his voice barely audible, this might be my last day. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She quickly placed the tray on the bedside table, her hands trembling. What can I do for you, Mr. Nicholas? She asked softly. Nicholas gestured weakly toward the tray, his breath labored. Emily's eyes followed his motion and froze. Among the familiar items was a small bottle she didn't recognize, and 2 sealed envelopes. Furrowing her brow, Emily picked up the bottle, turning it over in her hand. What's this? I've never seen this medication before, she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. She knew the medical regimen by heart. This was new. Nicholas's gaze grew more intense as he struggled to explain. That medication, and those envelopes, they're critical. I had them placed here by someone I trust. Emily's stomach churned with unease. What was happening here? And why did it feel like she was being drawn into something far bigger than herself? Emily's brows knitted as she stared at the mysterious bottle and envelopes. A mix of confusion and determination filled her. She leaned closer, her voice steady but tinged with worry. Is there something I can do to help, Mr. Nicholas? She asked, her tone carrying an unspoken promise of loyalty. Nicholas managed a faint smile, though his exhaustion was evident. Emily, your presence here has already brightened my darkest days, but there is something more. One last favor, he said, pausing as emotion tightened his throat. Pretend to be my daughter, just for a day. Please. Emily froze, taken aback by the request. Why would you ask me this? She questioned, struggling to understand. You're going to be fine. I'm sure of it. I believe you'll get better. Nicholas shook his head weakly. This is my final wish. I don't have much time left. His voice cracked and he broke into a violent coughing fit. Without hesitation, Emily rushed to his side, steadying him and ensuring his breathing eased. Despite the ache in her heart, she managed a gentle smile. All right, Mr. Nicholas, or should I say, Dad, she joked softly, trying to mask her sorrow with humor. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the loneliness his request revealed. He has no one but me, she realized, the thought hitting her harder than she expected. Before Nicholas could explain further, the room's heavy door swung open, and Meredith entered with brisk, calculated steps. Following her was a sharply dressed man clutching a leather briefcase. It's time, Nicholas, Meredith declared, her tone icy. I brought a lawyer to finalize everything. The warmth that had briefly filled the room evaporated as tension took its place. Emily instinctively stepped back, her gaze flickering between Meredith and Nicholas. Is this why he asked me to pretend? So he wouldn't have to sign those papers? She wondered, her unease growing. As if to confirm her suspicions, Meredith produced a thick document and thrust it toward Nicholas. You need to sign these papers now, she demanded, her hand trembling just slightly. Nicholas, gathering what little strength he had, looked at her with a gaze filled with sorrow and clarity. Meredith, even now when I'm at my weakest, this is what matters most to you, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Meredith didn't flinch. This is necessary, she insisted. Emily's heart pounded as she noticed Nicholas's breathing becoming labored. The steady beeping of the machines monitoring his vitals suddenly turned erratic, filling the room with a sharp, urgent sound. What's happening? Emily exclaimed, rushing to his side. The situation became a blur of panic and chaos. Meredith ignored the alarms and leaned closer to Nicholas. Sign it now, she pressed, her cold determination unyielding. Nicholas tried to lift his hand toward the document, but his strength failed him. His eyes fluttered, and his voice barely escaped his lips. Meredith, he murmured before his hand fell limply to his side and his head drooped forward. Emily's instincts took over as she fought to stabilize him, her worry for Nicholas overshadowing her growing disdain for Meredith. As Nicholas's head slumped to the side, Emily's instincts kicked in. She rushed to grab the resuscitation device, her nurse training guiding her movements. He's going into shock, she yelled, her voice urgent as she turned to Meredith. Emily's expression was a mix of plea and accusation. This can wait. I need to help him now. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Meredith's insistence on pushing Nicholas to sign the will had taken a toll, and Emily found herself in the agonizing position of watching his life slip away before her eyes. I have to save him, Emily thought, her determination igniting like a flame. As she worked to stabilize Nicholas, Meredith stepped forward and shoved her hands away, causing the resuscitation device to crash to the floor and break. Get out of this room right now, Meredith shouted, her voice sharp with anger. He was fine before you came into the picture. You're the one who's done this to him. Emily froze for a moment, stunned by the accusation. But a deeper force within her refused to yield. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was steady. No, she said firmly, more to herself than to Meredith. Then louder, she repeated, no, I need to do this. Even as Meredith's cold presence loomed over her, Emily's focus remained unwavering. She turned back to Nicholas. His breathing had grown more erratic, his face ashen. He's dying, Emily thought, despair swelling in her chest. But she couldn't let it end this way. With shaking hands, Emily reached for the mysterious medication she had discovered earlier. It was an act of desperation, one she hoped would give Nicholas a fighting chance. Stay with me, please, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her words hung in the air like a lifeline, a plea to the fading man before her. Meredith stared at her, equal parts furious and incredulous. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Get your hands off my husband. Though her tone was authoritative, it wavered with the faintest hint of fear. Emily barely heard her. All her attention was on Nicholas, his fragile thread of life slipping further from her grasp. Her mind raced. Nicholas was the owner of a major pharmaceutical company. Surely this medication was meant for emergencies. She hesitated only briefly before administering the injection. Time seemed to freeze as the medication entered his system. Emily watched Nicholas intently, praying for even the smallest sign of improvement. Each second stretched into an eternity, her heart pounding in her chest. But instead of the miracle she had hoped for, his condition worsened. His breathing, already shallow, grew more irregular, and his pallor deepened. Emily's heart sank. This can't be happening, she whispered to herself, the weight of failure crashing down on her. I just wanted to help. In her desperation, Emily pressed the emergency button she had asked Nicholas to install weeks earlier. It was her last hope. The room was silent, save for the frantic beeping of the machines and Meredith's sharp intake of breath. You couldn't even save him before he signed the will, Meredith spat venomously, her fury rekindled. You've done enough damage. Get out of my house now. For a moment, Emily stood frozen, her guilt and despair bearing down on her like a heavy fog, but her resolve flared again. She couldn't abandon Nicholas. Not now. Meredith, however, was relentless. I'll call security to escort you out, she said with cold finality. She left the room with the lawyer in tow, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Emily took the brief moment of solitude to act. She quickly tucked the envelopes she had found earlier into her uniform pocket. Hold on, Nicholas, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'll find a way to help you. Before she could do anything more, a security guard entered the room. Without a word, he motioned for Emily to leave. As he escorted her toward the door, she stumbled, her vision swimming. The emotional toll and the persistent dizziness she had been battling finally caught up to her. Emily stumbled, each step toward the driveway demanding more strength than she thought she had. Hurry up, the security guard muttered impatiently. The words stung, but Emily was too weak to respond. I just wanted to save him, she thought, her heart heavy with guilt. Without warning, the guard gave her a rough push, causing her to fall onto the mansion's gravel driveway. The world around her spun as she struggled to steady herself. The guard didn't bother to help, simply turning and walking away as though she were insignificant. Emily sat there, the cold ground beneath her grounding her momentarily. Her body felt as fragile as her spirit, but she forced herself to stay conscious. I can't faint now. Nicholas needs me, she thought desperately. Moments later, she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Oliver, the estate's gardener, his expression filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. A stark contrast to his rugged appearance. Emily nodded weakly, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "I'm fine, but it's Nicholas. He's in critical condition," she replied, leaning on Oliver as he offered his arm to help her stand. From a distance, the faint wail of sirens reached her ears. The ambulance had finally arrived. The urgency of the situation reignited her determination. "I need to go to the hospital," she murmured, half to herself, half to Oliver. The thought of leaving Nicholas alone in such a moment was unbearable. She knew Meredith wouldn't allow her to ride in the ambulance, so she began walking toward the nearest taxi stand. Each step felt like a battle, her dizziness and weakness threatening to overpower her. Weeks of ignoring her own failing health were catching up to her, but she clenched her jaw and pushed through. Once in the taxi, Emily collapsed into the back seat, letting out a shaky breath. Her hand brushed against her uniform pocket, where she had hidden the envelopes she'd found earlier. A sense of urgency overcame her as she opened one. Inside was a paternity test confirming Nicholas had a child, someone who shared his rare disease. Emily's heart sank as she read the detailed medical report accompanying it. The document contained no name or identifying details, leaving her with more questions than answers. Who could it be? She whispered, a deep unease settling over her. Upon arriving at the hospital, Emily hurried to the reception desk, her breathing labored and her voice trembling with desperation. "I need to see a patient." "Nicholas Vanderbilt," she said. The receptionist, a composed woman with a professional demeanor, gave her a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, but only family members are allowed at this time," she replied. Emily froze. Emily pushed open the door to Nicholas's hospital room, her heart sinking at the sight before her. The once powerful magnate lay motionless, connected to a web of machines. Each beep echoed the fragility of life, a constant reminder of how close he was to slipping away. She stepped closer, her chest tight with pain and guilt. Nicholas was intubated, his pallid face almost unrecognizable. A doctor stood beside his bed, making notes on a clipboard. Emily's throat tightened as she whispered, "Nicholas, it's me, Emily. I came as soon as I could." Her voice wavered, knowing there would be no response. She gently touched his hand, the coldness of his skin sending a shiver through her. His earlier words about pretending to be his daughter replayed in her mind. "I am his daughter," she thought, her resolve hardening. Turning to the doctor, she forced herself to speak. "Can you tell me his condition?" Her question was met with an attentive look as the doctor took a deep breath. "Mr. Vanderbilt is in a deep coma," he explained. "Given his current state, it's unlikely he will survive until the end of the day." The words hit Emily like a blow, her world collapsing around her. She gripped the edge of the bed, fighting to steady herself. He can't leave like this. Not without knowing he wasn't alone, she thought. "I need to be alone with him, with my father," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The doctor hesitated, but eventually nodded and left the room. Emily sank into the armchair beside Nicholas's bed, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Taking his hand in hers, she spoke through her tears. "Nicholas, I haven't forgotten my promise. Today I'll be your daughter, just like you asked." She closed her eyes, imagining the life they could have shared. "If we were truly father and daughter, we'd spend a day at the beach," she said softly. "No hospitals, no pain, just stories and laughter. We'd watch the waves in the morning and end the day with coffee by the sea." Her words were a mix of hope and heartbreak, painting a picture of a life that could never be. The room was quiet, save for the steady hum of machines, until the door burst open. Meredith stormed in, her presence cold and imposing. Her eyes burned with disdain as they landed on Emily. "What do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Emily straightened, her exhaustion evident but her determination unshaken. "I thought I made myself clear. You're fired. Leave now." Meredith continued, her tone icy. Emily, despite her weakness, stood her ground. You can't fire me, she said, her voice steady. I'm his daughter. The lie hung heavy in the room, but Emily had no other choice. Pulling out the envelope with trembling hands, she held it up as proof. Meredith's response was immediate. A sharp, derisive laugh that echoed unnervingly. His daughter? That's absurd. Look at you, your clothes, your demeanor. You could never be part of our family, she sneered. Emily flinched but didn't waver. It doesn't matter what you think, she said, summoning every ounce of strength she had. I'm staying here. He won't be alone. Meredith's expression darkened as the tension in the room reached its peak. Before Emily could say more, the medical team arrived, summoned by Meredith's accusations. This woman is disturbing the patient's peace, Meredith declared, her finger pointing accusingly. I demand she be removed immediately. Emily's body, already weakened by the events of the day, began to betray her. Dizziness washed over her, and her vision blurred. As she collapsed to the floor, her last words were a whispered plea. I won't leave him. As the darkness closed in, she caught a fleeting movement from Nicholas. His fingers twitched, an unmistakable sign of life. He moved, Emily murmured faintly before losing consciousness. The medical team rushed to her side and the room erupted into chaos. Amid the frantic activity, a glimmer of hope lingered. Nicholas's fight wasn't over yet. Meredith's voice cut sharply through the chaos. Ignore her. This girl is nothing but a nuisance. She can't even pay for her services, she sneered, her contempt palpable. Those were the last words Emily heard before darkness claimed her. When Emily regained consciousness, she found herself lying in a sterile, sunlit hospital room. The faint hum of machinery filled the air, and she blinked against the brightness, her mind racing to piece together what had happened. Panic set in as she took in her surroundings. The room was far too elegant, the equipment far too advanced for someone in her financial situation. I can't stay here. I can't afford this, she thought, her anxiety mounting. Ignoring the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her, Emily reached for the IVs in her arm and carefully pulled them out. Each movement sent sharp protests through her body, but her determination outweighed the pain. I have to act. Nicholas doesn't have time, she thought, swinging her legs over the side of the bed despite the burning in her muscles. Her eyes landed on a chair nearby, where her bag and the envelope containing the test results rested. Someone must have brought my things here, she murmured weakly. The sight reignited her resolve. She grabbed the envelope and her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed the number scrawled across the test papers. Her breathing quickened as anticipation mixed with dread. After a few rings, the call connected. Pharmalab Innovations, Dr. Harper speaking. How can I help you? Came the calm, professional voice of a man on the other end. Dr. Harper, this is Emily, Mr. Nicholas Vanderbilt's nurse. He's critically ill, and I found your contact on one of his test results. I don't know what to do, but I need to help him, she said, her voice quivering despite her effort to stay composed. Emily, yes, Dr. Harper replied, recognition in his tone. I'm aware of Mr. Vanderbilt's condition. It's imperative that you stay by his side. We need to ensure he's safe until we finalize our work. Can you do that? His words sent a chill through her. What's happening? I need to know what I can do, she pressed, the fear that her absence might cost Nicholas his life growing unbearable. Dr. Harper's tone turned grave. Nicholas is part of an experimental study for a cure to the rare disease that's afflicting him. It's a groundbreaking program, but it's still in the final testing phase. The results should be ready today, and I'm heading to the hospital now. But until then, he must not be left alone. Emily's heart sank. The stakes were higher than she imagined. I'll go to him now, she said, steeling herself despite the fatigue gripping her body. The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily to wrestle with her guilt. The medication I gave him, what if it wasn't enough? If he doesn't survive because of me, I'll never forgive myself. Her thoughts churned as she stood, her legs weak but resolute. Every step she took toward the door was a battle, but her determination burned brighter than her physical pain. The hospital corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as Emily pushed forward. She clutched the envelope tightly, silently praying for strength. Hold on, Nicholas. I'm coming, she whispered under her breath, her voice trembling with desperation. When she finally reached Nicholas's room, the sight that greeted her made her stomach drop. Doctors and nurses swarmed around his bed, their movements hurried and deliberate. The air buzzed with fragmented conversations, each one more worrisome than the last. "We're losing him," one doctor muttered grimly. "There's no way to stabilize him," said another, his voice heavy with resignation. Emily's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of the scene. "What's happening?" she managed to ask, her voice cracking under the weight of her anxiety. A nurse briefly glanced at her before responding. "His condition has worsened. We're doing everything we can, but—" The unfinished sentence hung in the air, its implication clear. Emily pushed closer, her eyes darting between the monitors and Nicholas's pale face. His chest rose and fell erratically, each breath a painful struggle. "This can't be the end," she thought, her fists clenching in desperation. "I won't let him go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. As Emily forced herself closer to Nicholas's bedside, the weakness threatening to consume her, a doctor's voice rose above the cacophony of beeping monitors. He showed signs of improvement earlier, but now his condition has worsened. The words sent a chill through Emily, and she turned her gaze to Nicholas. His pale skin seemed even more ashen, and every strained breath appeared like a battle for survival. The sight reignited her desperation. "I can't lose him," she thought, her heart racing. "Please," Emily begged, her voice thick with emotion as she addressed the team of doctors surrounding Nicholas. "You have to do something. Don't let him die." The team leader, a tall man with a grave expression, turned to her. "Miss, Nicholas is in a very delicate state. We're doing everything we can, but you need to understand." "No," Emily interrupted, surprising herself with the strength of her voice. "Don't tell me to understand. If there's even the smallest chance to save him, you have to try." Her outburst silenced the room for a moment, her words hanging heavy in the air. She swayed on her feet, her vision blurring, but she pressed on. The doctor hesitated, studying her intently before stepping closer. "We're trying everything possible," he assured her. "But you're in no condition to be here. You're debilitated. We need to take care of you too." "Forget about me," Emily countered, her voice cracking with urgency. "The only thing that matters is him. If I don't do everything I can for him, I'll never forgive myself." The doctor frowned but remained calm. "Miss, we must be realistic. Nicholas understood his condition better than anyone. I'm certain he'd want us to focus on you now, not him." Emily leaned against the wall for support, shaking her head adamantly. "He's not just a patient to me," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "He believed in me when no one else did. He gave me a reason to keep fighting. How can I abandon him now? You can't give up on him either. You took an oath, just like I did." Her body began to betray her as her vision darkened and her knees weakened. The lack of rest, food, and proper care finally took its toll. "Please, save him," she murmured before collapsing to the floor, the world fading to black once more. When Emily opened her eyes, the sterile brightness of a hospital room greeted her. She blinked slowly, disoriented, as her mind tried to piece together what had happened. The pain that had plagued her for weeks was gone, replaced by a sense of strength and clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. "Where am I? What happened to Nicholas?" she thought, her heart clenching as the memory of his condition returned. Emily glanced around the unfamiliar room, her nurses' training immediately identifying the signs of a high-end facility. "This isn't the hospital where I last saw him. How am I here?" Her thoughts turned practical. "I can't afford to be admitted to a place like this," she thought, her anxiety spiking. But as she shifted to sit up, she realized something extraordinary. Her body no longer ached. Her muscles moved with ease, and she felt remarkably strong. Pressing the call button beside her bed, Emily summoned a nurse. Moments later, the door opened, and a sharply dressed man entered. His face broke into a broad smile as he saw her awake. "Emily, you're awake. I'm Dr. Harper," he introduced himself, approaching her bedside. "We spoke on the phone. I'm Nicholas's doctor and pharmacist." "Dr. Harper," Emily said quickly, her voice laden with concern. "How is Nicholas? I need to know." His reassuring smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Everything will be explained soon. The attending doctor is on his way to speak with you," he replied, his tone calm. Emily's anxiety only grew. "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for Nicholas," Dr. Harper continued. You sacrificed your health to make sure he was cared for. That kind of dedication is rare. His words barely registered as Emily's mind raced. Is Nicholas still alive? Did I fail him? The questions swirled in her head, making it impossible to think clearly. Please, just tell me he's okay, she finally said, her voice cracking under the weight of her worry. Dr. Harper placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Rest for now, I promise. All your questions will be answered soon. But Emily wasn't sure she could wait. Nicholas, please be alive, she silently prayed, gripping the sheets tightly as she waited for the answers she so desperately needed. Part 9. Revelations and Reunions. Dr. Harper praised Emily warmly. You are extraordinary. People like you are rare, Emily, he said with genuine admiration. Before she could respond, another doctor entered the room, carrying a clipboard. Emily immediately bombarded him with questions. How is Nicholas? What's his condition? Is he? The doctor held up a hand, gently interrupting her. I'm here to talk about you, he said, his voice calm. You're in excellent health. Thanks to the medication, your recovery has been remarkable. He gestured toward the monitor displaying her vitals. Emily looked at him, her worry for Nicholas momentarily giving way to confusion. I can't afford this treatment, she murmured, glancing between the two doctors. I'm unemployed now. Meredith likely fired me. Dr. Harper smiled reassuringly. You don't need to worry about the cost. The Institute has covered everything as a gesture of gratitude for your extraordinary care for Nicholas. Emily blinked in disbelief. And my job? Harper's smile widened. There's something you need to see. Let's talk about that once you're discharged. Curiosity tugged at Emily, though she hesitated to let hope bloom. Could there really be something waiting for me? Meredith's hostility had all but ruined her chances of a glowing recommendation. After completing her discharge papers, Emily left the hospital with Dr. Harper, who drove her to the Vanderbilt estate. Did you bring me here to collect my things? Emily asked hesitantly as they approached the grand house that had been both a sanctuary and a source of pain. Harper's smile held a note of mystery. Not quite. Someone is waiting for you inside. He stepped away, leaving Emily to approach the mansion's imposing front door alone. Her stomach churned with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the middle of the living room, smiling warmly, was Nicholas. I can't believe it, Emily whispered, her voice trembling with joy and disbelief. Oh, thank God, she added, tears welling in her eyes as a prayer of gratitude escaped her lips. Nicholas, who had always been confined to a bed, now stood tall, his posture strong. He began walking toward her with confident strides. You're walking, Emily said, her voice breaking with emotion. I've never seen you like this. How is this possible? Nicholas reached her and wrapped her in a warm embrace. For a moment, they simply held each other, both overcome with emotion. You saved me, Nicholas said softly. More times than you can imagine. But Emily, there's something I need to tell you. There's more to our story than you know. Emily pulled back slightly, her brow furrowed. His tone was serious, almost nervous. What do you mean? She asked, her voice filled with both concern and curiosity. Nicholas took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with emotion. I have a daughter, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't know who she was until my health began to fail. It took a long time to get the results, but I found her. Emily felt her heart lift. You saved her too? She asked, relief washing over her. Nicholas smiled warmly. Yes, I saved her. He paused for a moment, his gaze softening as he looked at her. And I'm looking at her now. The words hit Emily like a thunderbolt. Her eyes widened as she took a step back. What? What did you say? She stammered, her voice choked with emotion. Nicholas's smile grew tender. Emily, you are my daughter. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head, struggling to process the revelation. How is this possible? She whispered, her voice trembling. Is this why you asked me to pretend to be your daughter? Nicholas's smile turned bittersweet. Yes, I asked you to pretend because I thought I didn't have much time left. I wanted to give you the chance to experience having a father, even if only briefly. But Emily, you don't need to pretend anymore. You are my daughter. Her legs felt weak and she collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. She had spent her entire life longing for a family, and now Here was the truth she had never dared hope for. Nicholas's voice softened as he continued, his eyes filled with remorse. I thought I was dying. I didn't want to give you a father just to take him away immediately. When I learned you'd spent your life in an orphanage, dreaming of finding your father, I couldn't bear to tell you the truth in such terrible circumstances. I'm sorry for hiding it. Emily struggled to process the revelation. Each word Nicholas spoke seemed to peel back layers of emotion she didn't realize she had buried. Tears welled in her eyes. And my mother? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happened to her? How did you not know you were my father? Nicholas's expression darkened with sorrow. He lowered his gaze as if gathering the strength to answer. Your mother didn't love me, he began, his voice tinged with regret. We were married, but she was never truly happy. One day she left without a word, choosing to live with another man. I didn't know she was pregnant when she ran away. If I had known, Emily, everything would have been different. His words struck Emily deeply, and she began to cry. Nicholas continued, his voice growing even softer. She left you at an orphanage right after you were born. Tragically, her life ended not long after that. Emily wiped her tears, her heart aching for the family she never had. I wish it could have been different too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But now, I have a father. A real father. Nicholas approached her slowly, his steps careful and deliberate. He embraced her, his own tears falling freely. I finally have a family, he said, and I'll thank God every day for the gift I've been given. As much as she cherished the moment, Emily still had questions. How did you find out about me? She asked. Nicholas's face grew serious. It was Meredith, he began, his tone grave. When she learned I was gravely ill, she began investigating whether there were any other heirs who might claim a portion of my inheritance. But she never told me what she discovered. Nicholas paused, his gaze distant, as he recounted the pivotal moment. During a health crisis, I went to retrieve my medication and saw your photo in one of the reports. It was like looking at your mother all over again. I knew in my heart you were my daughter. Emily listened intently as he continued. I hired an investigator to find you, but even then I couldn't be sure until the test results confirmed it. I didn't want to approach you right away because I was afraid you might have the same illness I had, afraid you might end up alone, like me. So I hired you as my nurse, hoping to protect you without revealing the truth too soon. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Nicholas revealed more. Meredith didn't want me to hire you, he explained. Perhaps she feared I'd uncover the truth. She tried everything to have you fired, but I wouldn't allow it. Even when I suspected her motives, I convinced myself she was only trying to protect me. Emily looked down, her face flush with emotion. I didn't want you to know I was sick, she admitted, feeling ashamed. I didn't want you to worry. Nicholas smiled warmly through his tears. You are an angel in my life, Emily. You cared for me as though you already knew we were family. I don't think I could have survived without you. Nicholas's face darkened as he prepared to share the final piece of the story. When the test results came back, I wanted to tell you immediately. But by then, my condition was so severe, I feared I'd hurt you more by dying right after revealing the truth. And that's not all. Emily's heart pounded as Nicholas continued. The tests also revealed something horrifying. Meredith had been drugging me, deliberately worsening my condition to ensure she inherited everything. Emily gasped, anger and sadness coursing through her in equal measure. How could she? She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Nicholas wiped his tears, his resolve hardening. The discovery devastated me, but it also strengthened my determination to protect you, my only true heir. Emily, still grappling with the avalanche of information, felt a swirl of emotions. Relief at finally understanding her origins, anger at Meredith's betrayal, sadness for all the years she had lost. And now? Emily asked, her voice steady but her eyes filled with fire. What are we going to do about Meredith? Nicholas met her gaze, a fierce determination burning in his own. We'll ensure justice is served, he said firmly. She will pay for everything she's done. Dr. Harper explained the next steps with a calm determination. While you were in the hospital, we took blood samples that confirmed everything. We now have solid evidence of Meredith's actions, drugging Nicholas to worsen his condition, also she could force him to sign over his fortune. Her lawyers were prepared to move swiftly, but so were we. Meredith was arrested before she could succeed. Justice has been served. Emily's relief was palpable, though her concern quickly shifted. "And your illness?" she asked Nicholas, her voice tinged with worry. "The cure you mentioned, is it definitive?" Nicholas smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope brightening his features. "Yes," he said. "Our medical team found the cure. The medication you administered was part of the trial, and by the grace of God, it worked. It saved you and it saved me too." Emily's eyes widened, her heart soaring at the revelation. "We're both cured?" she asked, her voice trembling with joy. Nicholas nodded, his smile growing. "Yes, my daughter, we have a full life ahead of us." A wave of relief and happiness washed over Emily, tears spilling from her eyes. "That's incredible," she said, her voice catching. Nicholas's expression softened as he leaned forward. "I've already booked tickets for us. As soon as you're ready, we'll take that special day at the beach I promised you." Emily gasped. You could hear me while you were in a coma?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I could," Nicholas replied. "And I'll do everything I can to ensure we have not just one day but a lifetime of memories together." Emily smiled through her tears, gratitude and love radiating from her. "Thank you, Dad, for everything," she said, her voice trembling. Nicholas's eyes misted as he heard her call him Dad for the first time. "No, Emily, thank you. You gave me a reason to fight." In the weeks that followed, Nicholas and Emily's bond deepened as they faced the challenges left in Meredith's wake. With the evidence against her irrefutable, Meredith was sentenced to prison for her attempts to steal Nicholas's inheritance and endanger his life. Justice was served, and Nicholas could finally focus on rebuilding his life with his daughter by his side. Nicholas, his health fully restored thanks to the innovative treatments developed by his pharmaceutical company, fulfilled his promise. He and Emily spent an unforgettable day at the beach. They laughed, shared stories, and made plans for their future, a future that now seemed brighter than ever. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, understanding, and mutual respect. Emily's journey didn't stop there. With her nursing expertise and newfound confidence, she took on a leadership role at Nicholas's company, now rebranded as Vanguard Pharmacare. She spearheaded training programs to help other nurses identify signs of abuse and neglect in their patients, signs that often went unnoticed. Drawing from her own painful experiences, Emily transformed her story into a powerful force for change. Her efforts not only elevated the company's reputation, but also positioned her as a leading advocate for patient rights and safety. Nicholas, inspired by his daughter's resilience and compassion, dedicated significant resources to her cause. Together, they established partnerships with organizations focused on domestic abuse prevention and patient advocacy. They created awareness campaigns and implemented new policies that set a higher standard for care in the healthcare industry. Emily's work didn't go unnoticed. Invitations poured in for her to speak at conferences and events, where she shared not just her professional insights, but also her personal story. Her words touched countless hearts, inspiring others to join the fight for a more compassionate world. As father and daughter, Nicholas and Emily built a life filled with purpose and joy. They celebrated each victory together, finding happiness in both the big and small moments. Their story became a testament to the power of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. If you were moved by this story, we invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to keep sharing these heartwarming and compelling stories with you every day. Don't miss the next captivating tale that's about to unfold. It might surprise you in ways you never imagined. We deeply appreciate your continued encouragement. Right now, you can click on the links appearing on your screen for a specially curated selection of stories, each one crafted to inspire, entertain, and move you. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.